Where did Franz Barden get the key to the True Kabbalah from? Well, as most people know, I consider people who claim to have access to a lot of channeled information to be full of something that doesn't taste good and doesn't smell nice as well. However, I'll get into a brief discussion of why that is. But then we're going to talk a little bit about the Sefer Yetzireth and its relationship to Franz Barden's book, Key to the True Kabbalah. We'll talk about a man by the name of Pierre de Lesenic. We'll talk about Martinism and its approach to mantric use of Kabbalah. And finally, we'll talk about a man from the southern Germany, Bavarian region who died in the 1920s, who also had a vocal mantric method by the name of Lesser Losario. So, with that being said, let's get started. All right, why do I not take a lot of channel information seriously? Well, here's the thing. As we talk about in the 60 Skills curriculum, most channeled information is the result of an entity reflecting off of an individual. So they have to know a lot about something first to have something to say that isn't just complete fantasy. And even then, as I know many of you here know, I stress you have to vet the information you receive very carefully. So here's the key. If there has to be a basis for the information transfer to begin with, a lot of these people that channel things wholesale out of the ethers, well, they're pretty much making things up. I don't think this comes as a surprise to a lot of people. I simply don't see it happening very often. So when you look at Franz Barden's first book, Initiation into Hermetics, it's clearly derivative. You can find all of those meditative techniques elsewhere. You might have to look, and Barden did us a great favor by putting everything together, but he didn't invent this on his own. Additionally, the second book is well known to have a bunch of sigils for Mercury, which were drawn from other sources. The supposed Jupiterian sigils are in fact Saturnian, and there are written records of those being used in the German language as well. So the second book, again, derivative. Now Barden clearly did a lot of work coming up with the descriptions with the entities involved, and in all likelihood that was the majority of his effort as a practitioner. But the questions always remained, where did the third book come from? Well, let's start at the beginning with the Sefer Yetzireth. As many people here know, the Sefer Yetzireth covers the three mother letters, which in that case is referring to fire, air, and water. Now, if you look at this chart, what you're going to see is a comparison between Barden's location of the letters and the classical Hebrew location of the letters with regards to body parts. As you can see, they're basically the same. So that's pretty interesting to begin with. And again, people have long known that there is an association between Jewish Kabbalah and the Key to the True Kabbalah. In fact, the mandala on the cover of the third book is very reminiscent of some things that can be found in esoteric Judaism, just with the Hebrew characters removed. All right, so where could Barden have potentially learned this from? Well, next comes in Martinism and Martinism's approach to Kabbalah. Now, one of the reasons why you don't see much written on this is the Martinists are big on secrecy. Okay, but they were very much present in the region that Barden lived most of his life in. And he would have known some Martinists, and I'll get to that in a minute. But all right, what about the Martinist approach to Kabbalah? Well, here's where it gets really interesting. The way Martinists practiced Kabbalah as a mantric or vocal art was they would suspend or focus on the Hebrew character, and then they would pronounce that character in German. Okay. So, If Franz Barden learned this from a Martinist, all he had to do was get rid of the Hebrew characters and just use the pronunciation and organ placement he was taught, which, as we've already shown, is basically the same as the Hebrew Kabbalah. All right, so if the Martinist had a system of mantric Kabbalah work, and all Barden had to do was remove the Hebrew characters from it, and again, considering the part of the world he lived in at the time, the political issue at the time with the rise of Nazism and a bunch of other things, it's easy to see why you would want to do this. Where could Barden have learned this from? Well, it turns out he knew a Martinist, and he knew a Martinist very well by the name of Pierre de la Sénac. Now, not a lot is written about this relationship, but as someone who's been involved in the investigatory business from time to time, I'm here to tell you, if there's a method associated with an organization and a member of that organization that can be identified, you've pretty much got a really good trail as to where this third party got it from. So it's pretty clear what happened is Barden learned Martinist Kabbalah from Pierre de la Sénac. Probably wrote a bunch of notes down on this. Now, because the Martinists were so big into secrecy, that would not have been a book that he would have published while he was alive. But, as we've talked about many times on this channel, due to the multiple, let's call them disconnects or mistakes contained within the third book, it's pretty clear the book was put together by someone who A, didn't understand the method, and B, probably got it from notes. The most likely candidate is, of course, Barden's secretary. So you've got the third book, which was the Martinist method. Barden learned it from la Sénac. Barden's secretary put the book together after Barden died. And because Barden was already dead when the book came out, the Martinist probably just wouldn't have said much about it, because what's the point in criticizing a dead man? Now, what's also interesting is there is a third party that could have informed what Barden did as well. And I'm going to get into why this is important. This was a doctor by the name of Benno Max Lesser Lasario, who wrote a book entitled The Original Vocal Gestures of Breathing Method. What this was a series of 30-some-odd vocal sounds that would be vibrated in the body to treat organ dysfunction. Organ, sound, vibration, letters in German. Lesser Lasario was in Germany and that whole area, and it's easy to see how a guy like Barden probably would have known him. Now, Lesser Lasario died around 1920, but his wife, Anna Marie, went on to try to popularize his method, and there is still a book written on this in German that you can buy off of Amazon.com. So, what I'm getting back to with all of this, and the original point of it, is Barden did a lot of work systemizing a bunch of disparate works and disparate techniques. And we all owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude for that. I mean, his work, in many ways, forms the basis of the 60 Skills curriculum alone. And again, tracking down all the individual techniques used in a book like IAH could be done, but it would have taken a lot of work. So, we all owe Barden for being the guy who did the work. But here's the point. This is where I'm going to get a lot of hate. People tend to deify figures like Barden. Barden was a man, put on his pants one leg at a time, learned his magic from other people, was devoted to it, did a lot of work with it, was highly skilled at it, but he was still very much a human being. He learned this stuff from other people, and he made improvements to it. Now, the only other thing that I would like to see outside of this or maybe some Martinist text describing how to use the Hebrew characters. Good luck finding that anywhere, but it's something to think about. So, again, if someone ever tells you that they channeled something, look at them twice and evaluate it multiple times before you believe it. Usually they got it from somebody else. And if they're lying about that, you need to ask yourself, what else are they willing to lie to you about? So, if you like the topic of today's discussion, give us a like and hit the subscribe button down below. Otherwise, as per usual, train hard and be well.